Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Comic Book Investment System podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Davis. I'm also known as Andrew the Investor Davis. And in case you didn't know, I buy and sell a lot of comic books every single year. And I love making money with comic books because they are an asset class. And clearly, you're here either because the title brought you here, you're a fan of top 10 lists, or you like talking about money, making money with comics, or you're interested in that alternative asset. Whatever the reason why you're here right now. And so let me just briefly explain what I'm going to talk about in this video is why top 10 lists are bad. So before I get into why they're bad, the problems with them, dealing with them, and all that fun stuff, I'm going to explain what a top 10 list is pertaining to comic books because that is what we are focusing on right now. And that is that somebody goes says, hey, these are the top 10 comics of the week, or these are the top 10 comics of the year. And what they're basically saying and what people are dealing with is that they're not necessarily voting saying these are my favorite stories. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, hey, what books are hot this week or this year or this month, and what books are going up in value, what books are going down in value, what books have potential, or what are really hot books of the week that are trading at a higher valuation. And so there are people on the internet, and there's a few big channels that do this, and they basically say, hey, these top 10 books are moving extensively. And they announce that at the end of the week, they're documenting what has happened, what things have sold for, what they're valued at. And look, there's nothing wrong with them talking about it and stating, hey, this book just recently sold 4x and maybe you should be paying attention to it. And there's nothing wrong with that or even putting that on the docket. Where it gets tricky is the following is that if they are watching comics for that week and then on that Sunday they say, hey, these are the top 10 hottest books for week X. I'm not going to pick a number. We could say, the March 2nd to March 9th. We'll just pick that as a random, 7 days. I don't know if that's, Sunday to Sunday, whatever it is. But what happens when they announce that is that every point of data they had was not documented before. So the market was naturally responding before they made the announcement of that. So if I have a comic book of a Batman book, whatever that is, and it's selling for $70 and I bought it for 10 and now it's selling for 70 and maybe there's only 5 of them out there, but it went from $30 to $70 throughout the course of the week or 2 weeks ago, and now it's selling and trading at $70. The second somebody with a big enough YouTube following where they might be doing 40, 50, 100,000 plays announces, hey, this Batman book that originally sold for $10 is now selling for 70. What winds up happening as a result of that is now everybody says, oh my God, my book is worth X. And they go and rush and put up their book on eBay. And now instead of having 5 or 10 of those copies up, you have 30 of those copies up. And this creates a supply versus demand problem. The reason why that book was fetching $70 was because there was less supply of it and there was more demand. And when you introduce another 20 copies of that book, that actually has to decrease the demand. And so it might now go down to 65 or 60 or 50. And so now these top 10 lists actually introduce an external data point in because they've notified people who weren't paying attention, who now say, oh, snap, that book is worth money. And now you have a flood of supply coming into the marketplace because people want to unload their book and say, oh my God, this book that I bought 6 years ago is now going for $900. But guess what? You and everybody has that same thought, and you all put up your book, and you realize that nobody can buy it. Nobody's going to buy it at $900. And that's where this gets tricky. And that's why these top 10 lists are very dangerous because it informs. And so when you have a record sale of a particular book, I have gotten into arguments with people on Facebook and like, you're wrong, but I'm like, wait a second. If we introduce more supply into anything, that naturally decreases the demand. It naturally decreases the want for something. So if I only had 100 iPhones, right? So this is my iPhone, and there's only 100 of these. Now all of a sudden, I can fetch whatever I want if somebody wants an iPhone. But now, if somebody goes and says, here's 100 iPhones this week, but next week there's going to be another 100, but then that same week, that I say I'm only selling 100, I introduce another 50, naturally the cost of this is going to go down. And so that's the whole thing, because I can't fetch $2,000 for this anymore if there's another 50 in play. And so that's something that I think people have to understand. And this is the whole issue of what's going on, I feel, and that's the problem, because the top 10 list basically lets everybody know, because when they're watching, they're getting 70, 80, 100,000 plays, and you have potentially 1,500 or 2,500 new people watching, and they may or may not have that book. It affects it. It's an external data point. And that's the problem here, is that there's an external data point being thrown into the wind and being presented and to everybody that then affects supply and demand. Because if all of a sudden everybody has that book and then nobody's really watching that book, and then you got a top 10 list saying, hey, this book is selling for $900, everybody's jumping at it because they bought the book for $10. But then if 100 new of those books comes in, it's going to be a very hard argument for it to have a record sale. And so that's the problem with top 10 lists, is that those lists don't account for the external data point they put in to it. And they don't account for the idea of a new realm of supply coming in. Now, it could very well be that nobody puts up that book on eBay because people want that book, don't want to sell, don't want to let it go. And it's just the idea that book X sold for X and somebody put it up and it did really well, but then maybe there's only another 4 that come in and it doesn't affect massively the supply. But even if on a normal week you have of a particular book only 3 of them up on eBay or my comic shop or in private sales, and then another 3 come up, well, you're going to say, oh, Andrew, that's only another 3. That is a 200% increase, or it's a 100% increase, or it's an overall 200% gain because you went from 3 to 6. So now you have 6 books on the market. So naturally, that might affect the price by 50, 60, 70 bucks, sometimes $100. It's not going to, now 100 of those books come up, obviously that's going to significantly lower the price. And we go back to that other video I did explaining the supply and demand curve. That's one of the things that I think people don't understand as well, is that supply and demand is that all of a sudden top 10 lists actually bring that thing when the demand exceeds the supply, and all of a sudden a top 10 list comes out, it actually brings the comic back down to an equilibrium price. And sometimes they might even bring it down further beyond an equilibrium price, and it definitely lowers the cost. And so that's what top 10 lists do. And the second that a top 10 list gets published, it actually becomes inaccurate, because again, those people have introduced an external data point into it where they didn't calculate for the new supply to come in, because they're basing their top 10 list in sales on a set amount of books up on eBay and documented sales and circulation. They're not calculating for a new realm of books to be introduced into circulation, which again, supply and demand. And I'm going to keep using those words because that's just the way it is. And if you disagree with me, feel free to disagree with me. But I guarantee you that if I introduced any particular book, you name the book, if we introduced 100 of those books, and if you disagree with me, I'm more than happy to have this discussion live. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty accessible. I'm pretty, out there. You can leave a comment in the section down below if you disagree with me, and we can have this discussion, because anytime you have a set number of items, but then you introduce another bunch of those items, so if you have 100 items and then you introduce another 100 items right after those 100 items sell, or while those 100 items are selling, it's going to affect cost. It's going to lower the price, because the more there is of something, the less valuable it is and the less exclusive it is. And that's the whole point of those top 10 lists, what they don't account for. So that's something that you need to understand as a comic book investor is those top 10 lists actually don't help you. They're actually beneficial if you're trying to buy stuff. Because what actually happens is that, if you're a seller, a top 10 list is not your friend. It doesn't help you. It introduces an external component that actually lowers the value of a book. If you are a buyer, top 10 lists are fantastic. And the reason why they're fantastic is that all of a sudden everybody and their uncle puts a book up thinking they're going to get X, and then there's 50 books that are up there, which means that if those people want to sell it, and believe me, people want to sell their comics, they might have to put their book $10 cheaper or $50 cheaper or $100 cheaper. And now you can run away with something and get it at a cheaper rate. Because whenever, again, there's more of an item, and that's what top 10 lists do, as a buyer, it's wonderful. As a seller, it sucks. The more there is, so if there's 50 copies of a book up on eBay, it makes it easier for me as a buyer to pick and choose and say, look, I offer you 50 because this person over here is asking 60. Do you want to work with me? And so that's the whole thing. Now, if there's only 2 of those books, I don't have a choice. But if I can go to 50 places to get the book, somebody's going to want to make that sale and make it a better deal for me. And believe me, I've done this before as a buyer and a seller, is that I have to undercut people. And that's not even including a top 10 list. That's just business. So that's something to keep in mind with that. But that's my whole thing on why top 10 lists are bad. They're not good. They don't factor in anything. They actually don't give an accurate description. And the second it's published, there's an influence that happens where people list their books thinking they can get that same price it just sold for. But that price that it sold for was not influenced. It was pre-top 10 list. And then there's after top 10 list. And if there's more books, you're not going to get the same price when there was less books. And so that's just the realm of the beast in that factor. But again, I digress. People disagree with me all the time on this, and I simply respond saying, you're right. That's why you don't understand macroeconomics and microeconomics. But again, if you disagree with me and you want to step up into my realm and come onto this show, we could talk about this issue. We could have a very civilized debate. We'll do it live. Nobody's going to be mean. We're just going to argue our points. We're going to have a discussion about this and anything else that you deem appropriate regarding this. But again, that's how I view it. That's how I think about it. And that's what I know is true, because that is simply supply and demand. And supply and demand has not changed since the birth of humanity. So anyway, I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching the Comic Book Investment System podcast. The whole point of what we're trying to do here is give further education, give further thought process into comic book investing, how I make money doing it, topics of it, and having a discussion on these issues. And hopefully you find these topics to be fascinating like I do, because I think it is a very cool section to be involved in. I think it is an awesome alternative investment class to be involved in. And I think that there's tons of money to be made in this sector. And I also believe in free education, because I do have paid education regarding this coming out soon. Class might be slightly delayed. Unfortunately, there's an issue with my computer. But beyond that, the class is coming, talking about comic book investing and teaching the basics, because without the basics, you really can't get into anything fancy. Because if you don't understand the basics, that's like laying a house and not having the proper, foundation. It doesn't work. So that's all I'm going to say. That's what I teach in my class, and that's what I thoroughly enjoy. More information will be available as we get closer and closer to the launch date. We are actually 55% through the recording and building out of the class. So, it's coming sometime in October. The launch date was technically supposed to be October 5th, but as I stated, I had a computer issue that is getting fixed in the next day or two. So we're slightly behind, but it is coming. It's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a great class. I think it's some of the best things that I've ever created. And again, it is the basics. It is nothing, telling you what to buy, how to buy it, things like that. It is skill based. There's no buy this book in my class. It is skill based, and these skills might need tweaking over time, but they're ultimately going to stay, pretty strong and sturdy. So, anyway, on that note, thank you for watching. If you're watching on the Facebook side, please come over to the YouTube side. If you're watching on the YouTube side, please go over to the Facebook side so you don't miss anything. And again, I hope that this information helps you. And if you disagree with me, let me know, and we can talk about it. We can talk about it publicly. We can talk about it privately. We can talk about it on the air. And I don't bite. We could grab a beer. You can grab a beer. I'll grab a beer, and we'll talk about this. And maybe we can work it all out publicly, because I believe that this is not just a one-sided conversation. If you think I'm wrong, I would love to hear why you think I'm wrong on this topic. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.